Okay. Hey everyone, welcome to the Past It Classics live show. I am sorry for being late. I was telling Julia earlier that for our Black History Month episode, we are going to be running on CP time. So this is just part of the celebration, and we are respecting my culture here.
As we should.
Yeah, as we should. Since we're a bit late, I figured we might as well just jump into introductions.
Cool.
Okay, cool. Um, so, who would like to introduce themselves first? And in these introductions, I wanted you to introduce yourself and like your history with Angela Davis.
Ooh.
Oh, I should mention what we're talking about. Um, it's our little secret. We're going to be discussing Women, Race, and Class by Angela Y. Davis. It's a collection of essays that are basically exactly what the title is. And if you don't know, Angela Davis is a famous like feminist, like anti-racist, communist. I don't think she's a part of the Communist Party anymore, but
Right.
that when she was like doing a lot of activism, that's the party she belonged to. Scholar and sort of advocate. So, and she's still alive today. She was born in 1944, and I pulled up the biography just in case. And she's currently 79 years old. So,
Still kicking. Go
yeah.
Angela.
Yeah, she was in, I think, 13th, that movie that came out from Ava DuVernay.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Um, so now with that little explanation, who would like to go first?
I can start to explain where I am. I'm Julia. My channel is called Shakespeare and Such. You guys are not even going to believe when I tell you that I have a video that is edited and ready to be uploaded. So I do create content on YouTube, believe it or not. But it's definitely, well, I'll tell you guys later. But anyways, yes, so that's exciting. I talk a lot about, well, I usually say like classics and historical fiction. I don't know. I feel like my reading has been less frequent and therefore even more sporadic with genres because I'm reading less. So like my favorite genres are just dispersed amidst the random things I'm reading more evenly. I think that makes sense. So I talk about a lot of different books, but now I actually talk about them on YouTube. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. Okay, Veruca, it's yours. So yes, I'm currently dog sitting, which is why I'm in a different house. Mirabelle from Encanto is behind me, and there is a good little boy on the floor that you can't see. But he gave a snuff when I said that. So, yeah. Oh, and I have not read any Angela Davis previously. I knew of her, like I was aware of her name as like an icon of Black history, but had like limited knowledge. So this was no spoilers, but a fantastic, great first experience with her.
Yeah.
Awesome. Kara, would you like to go ahead?
Yes. What if I just said no? It's
No,
I will
thank
not
you.
introduce myself. Hi everyone. I'm Kara. My channel is Wild Book Garden. I also read a lot of different things. If I had to pick my most read genre, definitely fantasy, but I also read a lot of historical fiction, nonfiction, contemporary, sprinkle in some sci-fi and some romance. Like I just read all the things. That's what I enjoy and it's important to me. Um, yeah, I'm starting to incorporate a few more of my other hobbies into my channel, but it is primarily books. But I have to show off that I made this sweater. I made my first sweater and I am so proud of myself because like
Oh
I've
my
been knitting
God.
for a long time, but this is the
That's
first sweater. So
amazing.
I was
I'm
gonna
like
tell you after the show
pretty
that I
proud of
loved your
myself.
sweater.
Thank
I
you.
love I also love that our spontaneous reaction was exactly the same. Taylor and I gasped, smiled, and went like this.
You guys performed that beautifully. As far as my experience with Angela Davis, similarly to Julia, I knew of her and like that she is like an icon of intersectional feminism. And I think I might have read like very small excerpts from her work in like a couple of classes, but I'm not sure. And I was even more interested in her with some other nonfiction books that I've read over the last couple of years, because obviously she was a huge influence on like other activists and other writers. So like what I knew about her was interesting, and then I learned even more, and I was like, okay, I really want to like prioritize reading her. So I'm so glad that Taylor picked this, because this was my first book by her, and I don't know if you can tell from the tabs, but like it was a great start. So
Awesome. Also, when you were talking about Angela Davis and you said like Angela Davis, like huge something, I thought you were going to say Angela Davis was a hoot or something like that. I was like, okay, I don't think she's known for her humor.
no.
What a hoot. Oh, Angela.
No. You know,
Cracking us
the
up.
timing for this was hilarious, because like I don't usually watch this show, but like Finding Your Roots, it's like they look at different like celebrities and like they do like genealogy and everything. So do you know who was on the episode last night? It was
Who?
Angela Davis.
Wait, really?
Yes, it was like the timing was like incredible. So it was a very good episode too. Super interesting.
I was gonna say, who is she related to?
Well, there's a couple of bombshells. So like she didn't know a lot about her family, and she did have some like white ancestors, because of course, you know, when you have family who are enslaved, you generally end up mixing, which is like, I wish they had talked a little bit more about how icky that was. Like she did, but like the host and everything. But it was really interesting.
Yeah.
But then like the white side of her family, they ended up finding out that one of her ancestors had come over on the Mayflower. And yeah, like it was so funny. It was like at the very end of the episode, he's like, "We have one more surprise for you," and he has her like read, this like declaration or like passenger manifest or something. So like she reads the part and she's like, "I don't know what I'm looking at," and he's like, "That's a list of the settlers who came over on the Mayflower." And she starts going, "No, no," and he's like, "That's great. She's like, "I can't believe it. That's too much for me."
Wow.
So anyway, it was a really good episode. It was very interesting. So the timing was spectacular.
I love genealogy, things like that. I was able to trace my dad's side of the family back to the 1500s, because that's the only side we can trace back that far, because some of my dad's ancestors were colonizers. I know, given land by the King of Spain.
Oh no.
So reading it was wild, but there is one ancestor who might have done a murder in the 1800s, and he ran away. So that's my family line.
Wow.
Wow.
Saucy.
Yeah.
So I'm Taylor. You're on my channel, Page Screen Taylor. I've thought about posting. I looked at my bookshelf longingly. And you know, I would love to post again. We can blame The Witcher, and also no one can tell me to post because it's Black History Month, so I get away with everything.
It's true.
And when I do post, I like to talk about books across all genres. I used to talk mostly about YA, but I feel like I've gravitated more towards like adult fiction, though YA still has a really lovely place in my heart. But yeah, I'm currently reading like one of those huge adult fantasy books. So that's currently what I'm in the mood for. I feel like winter usually makes me want to like stay in and read it like chunky fantasy books. So that's where my mood is right now. And this is also my first time reading Angela Davis, and you can see by the amount of tabs before I had to switch to the audiobook because last week was rough. I also really enjoyed it. I do assume that I might have read like an essay or something from her, as like later into my college career, I started getting really interested in like women's studies and feminist studies. But I don't know if this has ever happened to you guys when you've taken a class where they like assume everyone has read this big like author, or like everyone's seen this huge film, and they're like, oh, well, we don't need to cover that because everyone's read it. And you're like, no, I haven't. So I feel like that might have been the case and why I haven't reached for her. But yeah, I really liked this book. And going into it, or speaking of said book, I wanted to go over some content warnings before I got a little bit more into. Well, actually, no. Let's do our overall thoughts and ratings first.
Okay.
So, Julia, you went first. So, Carrie, did you want to go?
Sure. So I gave it 5 stars. I thought this was a really fantastic nonfiction. I'm just like, obviously, I had high expectations, but somehow it was still even better than I thought. Like, I just really liked the way she made her points and the examples she used, and a lot of them were ones that I wasn't as familiar with. So that was really interesting as well. I was surprised that the structure of the book was kind of like a timeline of the women's rights movement. So that was really interesting to me. And I really liked that because, like, I also have been reading a lot more nonfiction about that period. And it's always nice to read a more intersectional approach to that time period. And I was like surprised at, I don't know, at like the number of like good parts, like not to like overshadow all of the really bad stuff she talks about, but it was really interesting seeing like the number of people who it's like, oh, like you were doing a good thing. And I think that was important because when she's talking about the importance of coalition, it's like, yeah, even people in like the 17 and 1800s were like, this is not right and we need to do something about it. So yeah, I just thought it was really, really well done. Even like the sort of like side points or side examples she was making along the way, I'm like, this is so smart. Like I never thought about that connection before. Like even like the first essay when she's talking about the way that enslaved Black women, like their view of housework was so different because that was the only labor that they could do that was actually for them. And so that was so different from like white women who it was like, you know, stay in the kitchen, and it was like a very like misogynistic thing. So anyway, I thought it was brilliant. 5 stars. I'm very excited to read more from Angela Davis.
Awesome. And Julia, did you want to give us your ratings?
Yeah, so I similarly really enjoyed it. I guess maybe I don't know how to phrase this. So I'm still not even sure because in our like Past It Classics promotional things, I was calling this a collection of essays, and I do still think it is a collection of essays technically, but I was assuming it was like a bunch of unconnected works of Angela Davis that were put together into a book, as many essay collections are. But this seems to me like something that she wrote very intentionally all to be published together. Do we know? Do we have like a...
I know it's so cohesive, and like I saw it called a collection of essays elsewhere too,
Yeah.
and it's like I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't seen that because it feels very much like a one complete nonfiction work that is broken up into different time periods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Like until maybe
I
the
don't know
last
either.
2 essays, I was like, this is
Right.
just like very chronological. And we know I'm a hoe for chronology. I love that. So I really appreciate that. I love things being told in order. Okay.
Yes.
We can add that to
Don't
our
get
Past It
fancy on
Classics meme thing.
I was just thinking that, Julia, I'm a hoe for chronology.
Okay.
That's me. It's like our little like a sitcom intro. So
It
yeah, I
feels
really loved like the organization of it, and obviously like the subject matter, and also like you were saying, Cara, too, just the way that she would like bring up a topic that was like, yes, I know, yeah, racism bad, or you know, like whatever it was going to be, and then she'd bring up those like little side points where I was like, that is so like so smart and so just like a side that I had never thought of whatever it was in that part. So loved all those things. Because we know I have a weird flawed rating scale. This is what I'm going to say brought my rating down, but it's like hardly anything. I think there's a lot of great writing in this, but I found that at least half the quotes that I wanted to save were her quoting other people. So I was like, I can't attribute that to her. So I was like, her writing is good, but it's not like wow, like it was like one of those things. So really dumb. So in the end, it got 4.6 stars for me. Like it's a really good.
And I do think it is a skill to know what to quote and how to use it.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
but yeah, I definitely have a lot of quotes that are like her concepts, and the way she talks about her concepts are fantastic, but it's not necessarily like, oh yeah, that quote should be on a mug. Like,
Yeah. There were like, I think maybe 4 of her own quotes throughout the whole book where I was like, that phrasing is brilliant. And it was like, in that moment, I was like, yes. But then other things I was like, okay, those aren't her words, but it is a good selection.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask, because I know we all have the same edition. There were like 2 huge moments of deja vu that I had where I was like, I've read this exact thing, where it was like in the later chapters, but it came from the earlier chapters. Do I have like a misprint in my book, or did she like literally cite the same exact thing? You're both looking at me so confused.
I mean, it would make sense that she would, because one of the things I do like about this book is that she also like, she'll talk about a time period and she doesn't like leave it there.
Yeah.
Like she talks about things happening concurrently, or like what someone said 100 years ago is still relevant.
Yeah.
It was relevant then, and it's even relevant 100 years later. So it would make sense that she would quote something like twice.
Yeah.
Especially if maybe like she maybe eventually intended to connect the essays into a collection, but maybe she wrote one individually.
I'm like,
and then was like,
them now, because I'm like,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
Angela Davis is a very no frills writer.
Yeah.
So, and I like that about her, but I do agree with you that there were no like flowery, flowy quotes that someone would put on a mug, and then I'd get upset because I'm like, this is just capitalism taking over feminism again.
Right.
Angela
Davis would hate this. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh no, go ahead.
Sorry, Taylor. I was gonna say, speaking of capitalism, I really was impressed with the way that she, I think, showed very convincingly that like misogyny and racism and all these other issues are in fact like so intrinsically connected to capitalism. Like, and some of these were like, I had heard people make these connections before, but the way she lays it out is just so clear and so smart. Like, I mean, even the example I talked about at the beginning, it's like right off the bat, it's like, this is like the intersection of women, race, and class, when she's talking about like the enslaved women who would do domestic work, and how that was like more of a, that was something they took pride in, because it was like the only work they could do for their own family. So I mean, like, I know it's like supposed to be an intersectional book, so it's not like it's surprising, but I was so impressed at how, like, I don't know, good she was at that throughout.
Yes. That was
Yeah.
one of the notes that I had made. Like the word that I used was inextricable, right? Because like we know all these issues are like connected, but reading this, I was like, you cannot talk about race issues without also talking about class issues and, sex and gender issues. Like they compile, and it's her mind.
The thing that was most mind-blowing to me was like sort of realizing that the first women's rights movement was sort of on the back of the abolitionist movement.
Yes.
Because the women figured out, wait, we can't help them unless we get like the vote and a political say. And then eventually it sort of like diverged into like, oh, wait, let's not give Black people the right to vote. They're so silly and goofy. Why would we do that?
Goofy Taylor.
and like I never even figured like, okay, that's one, it's okay. It's always hard to imagine timelines because you imagine history as like a straight line. Like this happened and then this happened and then that happened. And then when you read the fact that like while we were doing the abolitionist movement, we were starting the women's rights movement and women were fighting for the rights to vote, as opposed to when it's usually taught in history books. You talk about the abolitionist movement and then you start the women's rights movement with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. And you don't talk about all of the women, including Black women, who came before. It's just this happened and then this happened. And I love the fact that she really made it clear that like all of this was happening at the same time. And it just kept happening. It wasn't over in the 1800s. It continued into the 20th century. And I mean, we can still make the argument today that it's still continuing now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what I thought was like so brilliant about her organization, was that like it did go through time. It was like, these were the earliest issues that, you know, like societally we had to address. And then it branched into this and that and whatever. But throughout every essay or chapter or whatever you want to call them, she was still referencing, and now this person is doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And while they were doing this, so-and-so was over here doing this. And yeah, it was just very well organized.
Yeah.
And I knew that the abolitionist movement and the women's rights movement, like specifically the right to vote, I knew that those were connected and that there was a lot of overlap until, as you said, Taylor, there was like a split where they're like, oh, wait a second, no, we don't actually want to do this. So I knew that they were connected, but I thought, like, again, she just did such a good job of like laying out like the timeline, but also how it's not a straight timeline, like you guys were saying. And I also, this made me like even more interested in reading some of Frederick Douglass's like actual works, because like I knew about him and I had seen him quoted, and this just like reinvigorated that interest. Like, what this is gonna sound like such an understatement, but like Frederick Douglass, what a cool guy.
Frederick Douglass, cool dude.
Cool dude, yeah. And I just thought that was like, I really liked the part where she was talking about how involved he was in the women's rights movement. And I also think Angela Davis did a great job of laying out like why the sense of urgency was different for women getting the right to vote and Black people getting the right to vote. Like, she wasn't saying, and Frederick Douglass wasn't saying that they were more important, but he's like, you know, we are being lynched, and this is like one of our only chances of continuing emancipation is being able to get the vote. So he wasn't saying like we should get it first, but he was like criticizing the white women who were like, well, if you're not going to give us the right to vote at the same time, we're going to actively work against you getting the vote. Because that's like the thing, is
Yeah.
it wasn't even like I'm going to prioritize me, which would still be selfish. It was like, we are going to fight back against you getting the right to vote if we don't get it at the same time. Like, I just,
it felt
again,
very
I knew
like
that,
high
but
school.
yeah.
Which is like an understatement, but it feels very much like it's so juvenile. Like,
Yeah.
you
Like,
can
people's
work for
lives
two
are at
things at
stake.
once. Yeah.
And they're like, you didn't help us enough, so
Yeah. And also I feel like we can rank things just a little, like not being able to vote, horrible, oppressive. Getting lynched like in astronomical numbers, just a little bit more important.
yeah. Like there's
A
that
little more
great,
urgent.
yes, exactly, like urgency. There's that great quote from Frederick Douglass where he is speaking to one of the women's rights clubs, and he's like, until women are lynched for being women, until their families are, you know, like he wasn't saying that this is unimportant or that like you guys aren't suffering, but he's like, it's not the same immediacy, you know, it's not like your lives are not at stake at the moment. So
Yeah.
Frederick Douglass, cool guy.
I have read the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, and it is really, really good. Like, fantastic book. And I will say, Frederick Douglass is a little bit messy. He like spills some tea on some people and names them. Like, he shaded the vice president for being racist to him.
As he should.
Yeah.
I'm even more excited now.
I'm pretty sure like all of my annotations were not great for that book, because it was things like, girl, stop, or like, Fred, you're too much.
Red.
But it is a fantastic read, so I definitely recommend it.
Yeah.
Something else I wanted to bring up before I give my rating.
I know, we've like devolved already.
I know, we're already discussing.
I figured this would be like a looser structure because it's not like fiction, so we can't do like symbolism or beat by beat plot points. But I did want to mention how like accessible this book was. I find that a lot of like essays and nonfiction books are written in a way, they're written for peers as opposed to people who are coming into these concepts new and fresh and who might not understand everything. And I don't want to be like, oh yeah, it's written for, people who don't know what the word panacea is, because she does use that word in the book, but it's written in a way that, like, even if you don't know all of the terms, you can pick it up really easily. And it feels like a very, like, non-intimidating introduction to feminism that's a lot deeper than the other non-intimidating introductions to feminisms that I've read before.
Yeah,
100%
exactly.
agree.
It still has depth, like,
Yeah.
and it is still very nuanced, even though it is still accessible. Like, that's a really hard thing to do at the same time. But
Yeah. And I feel like it shows a genuine knowledge on her behalf, because a lot of people think that showing off how smart you are involves, like, using a lot of obscure terms and, like, really just rambling on and on about how much you know, as opposed to being able to take the information you have and explain it to the layman. And I thought that was, like, it was just written in a way that was very to the point. You aren't confused. Like, she very much explains everything really, really well. Also, I really like this book, and I'm probably going to give it 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. I usually have a hard time reading nonfiction books, just because I'm like, where's the romance? Where's the magic? But I was like, okay, well, I'm hosting, so I should try and read the physical copy before I eventually fall asleep and find the audiobook online. I guess, Julia?
I was going to say, I can tell you where the romance was. It was between that Irish girl and her girlfriend who got out of prison before her.
And they wrote that poem?
I'm telling you.
Yes. That was one of those, I'm like, I don't think you need to call them friends. Like,
when the historians were like, they're friends. I'm like,
just
she says
gal
love
pals.
twice in this poem. Love is twice in there.
It was very, like, I don't want to be like, oh, friends can't write stuff like that to each other, but I don't know if I would write that to a casual friend.
For my friend, I would not put the word love twice in it. Okay, that's all I'm saying.
Nana says, if nonfiction had magic, I would read it more often.
Right.
Same. If magic were real, I would read nonfiction.
I mean, you could read nonfiction about magicians, but not quite.
You know what? Next book is going to be the autobiography of Harry Houdini. I don't know if he wrote an autobiography, but I'm saying he did now.
Probably, yeah.
What was I going to say?
Sorry, I got too excited to talk about the sapphics, so I was like, let me jump in.
I remember where I was. So, like, I was surprised at how, like, easily I was sucked in, and it wasn't until the last bit where, like, I was running out of time, things got desperate, that I switched to the audio version, which you can't find in the US unless you go to YouTube, by the way.
Well, I wish I had known, but okay, I read the whole thing with my eyeballs. Too late to go back.
I found out today when I was like, there is no way someone hasn't read this book out loud and had, like, they didn't record it. And I found a couple of them, and it was great. But, I was able to get through over half the book with just my eyeballs, and it was easy, and it was good. The only reason I switched was because I was running out of time. And with that, we can go to the content warnings as we get a little bit further into this book. So our content warnings are murder, lynching, racism, sexism, rape/sexual assault, suicide, grief, forced sterilization, loss of child, slavery, mentions of the N-word. I don't know if I missed anything there.
That sounds pretty complete to me.
Yeah. I don't know if we'll talk about all of these, because, like I mentioned earlier, this book feels a lot of discussion on its own, and I have a feeling we're not going to get to all of my questions because we're just going to talk.
We're already in it.
Half hour in, and we just gave our ratings.
So my first question for you all is, did anything in this essay, like, surprise you, and what is one thing you learned from reading this book? So, like, not just surprises in, like, I'm surprised at how good this is, but, like, surprises in, like, oh my gosh, I never knew that. Or like, I had this assumption about this era of feminism, and, da-da-da.
I mean, I had many surprises. I'm hard pressed to tell you what exactly they were at this time.
One thing that really surprised me was in the earlier chapters. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that there were more examples of this, but even in like colonial times or like shortly after the revolution, even before the like wider abolitionist movement kind of got going, there were like individual people who were rebelling against that. Like I think Prudence something was her name, where she accepted a young black girl into her school and all the white families were angry and they like pulled their kids out of her school and she's like, fine, I'll teach a school for black girls.
Yeah.
And she did it. Like
That was just a Quaker woman. I was like, you're cool, I like you.
I don't know, maybe that would make sense if she was a Quaker, because they were in general, like broadly speaking, I think they were very pro-abolition. So it's not that I was surprised that there were people doing that, but I had never heard her story before, and there were a lot of stories like that that I had never heard, which did surprise me because, like I mentioned, I have been reading quite a bit about like the early women's rights movement in the U.S. So I was surprised at, I guess, those kind of anecdotes.
The name was Prudence Crandall.
Okay, yes. Like she just, what a badass.
And this was the 1830s. So
Okay, so not quite as early as I thought, but
still pretty early.
yeah. Like what a power move. Like they're like, you can't have a single black student. She's like, what if I have all black students? Like,
what if I do the opposite of what you said?
yeah. And of course she was like run out of town, but she managed to do some things before that, which I think is great.
Yeah. And I think something that surprised me about this book was all of the women who tend to go unnamed, and men to a lesser extent, but all the women who tend to go unnamed. Like I never heard of Prudence Crandall. I never heard of, were they the Grimke sisters?
Yes, I'm obsessed with them now.
I love them. Yeah.
They're so good. And the thing is too, it wasn't like Harriet Beecher Stowe did a lot for the abolitionist movement, and I think it's disingenuous to say that she didn't, but she also had a very like patronizing and like not quite complete view of how Black people are, and by that I mean that they're people and not like children.
Right.
So like it's easy to think that history is full of your Harriet Beecher Stowes and Susan B. Anthonys without realizing that there were white women who had beliefs that are considered to be, I mean, modern is a bit of a stretch because I feel like it's just the bare minimum, but like for their time. So when a lot of people talk about like, oh, well, they're of their time, it's like, yeah, Thomas Jefferson had slaves. That was the time. But you have all of these other people who knew it was wrong.
I was just using that example like yesterday. Like I was telling somebody about this book and I was like, I think it's so important that she includes all of those, or a lot of those, like more positive examples of like what you can accomplish when you do have a coalition. And I feel like that's important for so many reasons, because not only is it like, yeah, it's good to see examples of people doing it right, you know, so you can kind of like attempt that, but also, yeah, we shouldn't let people off the hook so easily. It's like, it was the times, and it's like, yeah, but some people already knew this was wrong, including all of the people who were actually enslaved. Like it's not like they were of the time and they're like, yeah, this is right. This feels like
Don't allow it. No.
Yeah. Like if it were of the time, the slaves would have slaves and then their slaves, like it would be slaves all the way down. Like it wasn't.
Yeah.
Most people knew it was wrong.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of like surprises, I was also surprised at how, I don't know, at like the way she in some ways gave like a lot of grace to some of the like really, really imperfect activists. Like I was expecting, when she started talking about Susan B. Anthony, I was ready for her to drag her, honestly, because like most of the more modern things I've been reading about her have been like very, like they've been talking more about like the negative, like her racism, because that is something that until recently people didn't want to talk about. They're like, no, she was a great feminist, like don't bring that up. And I was just very surprised at the way Angela Davis would like she talked about like she did accomplish these good things, and she did obviously address the many ways that she failed. Like it wasn't like she was being too forgiving of her, but I just was surprised that like even like Margaret Sanger, who ends up buying into the eugenics movement, she talks about her in the earlier part of that chapter as doing really important things. So I don't know. She not that I like expected Angela Davis to be like really harsh, but it was just more of a there was more context even for the people who were very flawed than I think I expected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. My surprises actually tie into what both of you said. So, like,
Love it.
my thing was with a lot of the big names that she references, like, I know their names and, like, whatever they were associated with. So, like, Susan B. Anthony, early feminist, Frederick Douglass, like, early, like, abolitionist, like, these things, yes, obviously, like, that's just what we learn. So it was really interesting reading. And then, like, she, for a lot of these people, I mean, not so much with Frederick. We know he's amazing, but like she would start with like all the cool things and like
Yeah.
they started this and they supported this, and then like 2 chapters later would be like, and then Susan started to do this, and I was like, she what? So it was
Yeah.
like, it was really well crafted in the way that like it was accurate to the good that they did and the harm that they did, but like you said, Kara, it wasn't too critical of them, but it was like kind of an emotional roller coaster for me as a reader. Where I was like, well, what else did they do? Did they turn this around? Did they keep doing this? So it was like very compelling.
Yeah.
And then I was also pleasantly surprised because, I mean, and it's true, it's not untrue just because she found examples, but we usually hear like, history is written by the victors. So we have like all these white men who we have 1,000 sources of and stories of. And then it's like, and then we sprinkle in a couple women, and then we sprinkle in like a couple people of color. But I was like really enjoying how often she would bring someone up and be like, and here's a Black woman who did this, and here's another Black woman who did that. And I was like, you found them, you found these sources. I don't care how you did it. Like, it was just great.
Yeah, I went through and I was like underlining all of the names that like of people who did awesome things that I never heard about.
Yeah.
So I can like look them up later because I'm like shocked at how much was cut out of like most of our history curriculum.
Yeah. I love Ida B. Wells. I just want to read like
I didn't know she was like
her.
a huge part of like the Marxist communist movement or like labor like movement. Like that was surprising to me. And I didn't even know she like I think all we learned about Ida B. Wells was that she had a newspaper and she wrote good.
You wrote good.
And like it was so interesting to get this more complete picture of her in a way that I had before, and in a way that was so much fun.
She was another one who I only knew by name. I was like, yeah, Ida B. Wells. I've heard of her. But like, what did I know? Virtually nothing. So
yeah,
I loved it.
Yeah. Or like there's some where I have read a little bit. Like I still want to read the things that Ida B. Wells actually wrote herself. Like she's done a couple of like autobiographies, which I would love to read. But I have like read some things about her now, but it's like it's still so exciting to like see these names and hear about these people, and it's like, oh yeah, like I really like learning about them. I want to read more. Like I had heard of the Grimke sisters. I knew a little bit about them, but like after reading this, I'm like, do they have like a biography? Like it's just yeah.
Also, imagine, did you say Ida B. Wells has a couple of autobiographies? Imagine being cool and interesting enough to have a couple of autobiographies, not just one.
I'm pretty sure she does. Maybe I'm thinking of other nonfiction she wrote, so don't like fact check me, but if anyone could, she could.
Like, right? Like you get like middle-aged and you're like, wow, what a life. I'm going to write this up. And you live like another 20 years and you're like, I got to keep going. Hold on.
Yeah. Ida B. Wells 2 Electric Boogaloo.
All right. That's the meme.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know. This is going to be a hard one to memeify. Maybe I'll just put like a recommendations post. Nope. Ida B. Wells 2 Electric Boogaloo.
And what was the one you said? Like, I'm always a hoe for chronology or something. Or Frederick Douglass, cool dude. Like.
Something like going off of what you guys were saying earlier about like showing the different facets of like people of the feminist movement, I thought that was like really good, and I wish we could talk about that with other like significant historical figures. Like, you know, no one should be shocked that George Washington owned slaves. I was shocked in like high school. And it's like it doesn't take away from like the good that they accomplished. It just means that they were a very complex person, and we can discuss like what that means. And it's the same with Susan B. Anthony. Like she accomplished a lot of good in her lifetime, but like she also like was a bit of a eugenicist. So
Yeah.
she got red pilled. And like I thought that what was also interesting, and it's something that I keep thinking about because we see it again and again throughout history, but the sort of like the people in power, so the capitalists, the patriarchy, you know, the white supremacists, try to take these movements and redefine it for the people who are most likely to benefit from the, I guess, like ruling class or ruling group. So, you know, the idea of how like women's rights was like they got a couple of prominent like racist men to sort of back them. And what the men did was like sort of convince them to reformulate their idea of feminism to the idea that it's this like womanhood is this divine being, or like white women are like the mothers of the earth. And it's like, honey, you're stepping backwards. You're talking about yourself as a mother only. Like, or like with labor movements, and sort of you see the separation of like Irish and Italian immigrants or the descendants of immigrants and people of color, and how they were able to sort of elevate, you know, people who weren't considered white at the time, but we consider white today, into whiteness. And then the movement loses power because they've lost a group of people who were swayed into that sort of power. And it's something that like I always kind of knew, but having it sort of like written down, it was just so like mind blowing.
Yes, absolutely. Also, because we know, I love a mother. I love a motherhood plot line. I love a mother-child relationship. But every time Angela Davis said the cult of motherhood, I was like, pop off! I love that. That's so good. Like it's a good phrase.
It is, yeah.
When motherhood is used for good, it's good. But when motherhood is used for evil,
yeah.
Oh my God. Speaking of which, what was the part when she was talking about like women's clubs, and she was like, women needed something that was like not about what they did at home, but related to, and all I could picture was like a modern group of moms like going off to their spin class together. I was like, this is still like everything she's talking about is still relevant, and it's like crazy.
Or like moms against drunk driving, you know, it's like activism that is like tied to stereotypical roles, but they kind of turn that into like, well, fine, if we're experts in this, then shut up and listen to us. Like, I love that. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
I forgot. Well, I did mark it. It's just I marked so many things.
I
But I did super quickly want to talk about the story of when sorry, I just came across another part that I really liked with this one woman who was talking about the 9-hour day for domestic servants, and was trying to get like new chairs for like
girls.
Yeah. And so she says, my girls have to stand on their feet 10 hours a day, and it makes my heart ache to see their tired faces. Mrs. Jones, said I, how many hours a day does your maid stand upon her feet? Why, I don't know, she gasped. 5 or 6, I suppose. At what time does she rise? At 6. And at what hour does she finish at night? Oh, about 8, I think, generally. That makes 14 hours. She can often sit down at her work. At what work? Washing, ironing, sweeping, making beds, cooking, washing dishes. Perhaps she sits for 2 hours at her meals and preparing vegetables, and 4 days in the week she has an hour in the afternoon. According to that, your maid is on her feet at least 11 hours a day, with a score of stair climbings included. It seems to me like her case is more pitiable than that of the store clerk. My caller rose with red cheeks and flashing eyes. My maid always has Sunday after dinner, she says. Yes, but the clerk has all day Sunday. Please don't go until I have signed that petition. No one would be more thankful to see the clerks have a chance to sit. I'm trying to figure out the name of who said that.
Well, I love it because in context, wasn't she was like, this is a conversation I had with my friend, and I roasted her.
It's the equivalent of like making a TikTok where you're calling out someone.
Yes, truly. Yeah, that, because I think way earlier in like one of the first couple chapters too, she was talking about how like, oh yeah, and the workers really wanted to like petition for it was like crazy. It was like a 10-hour workday instead of like a 12 to 14-hour workday. I was like, a 10-hour workday? That's what you want? That's so sad.
Oh, something else I wanted to share, which was so goofy. It was like hilarious. When Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin or Ruffin, I don't know how to pronounce her last name. It seems French, but and she was trying to get in the like white like clubs to sort of speak. And so she tried to like force herself to speak, and she was kicked out of the it was like a federation. The national there's so many different federations and clubs. But she was kicked out of this sort of like speaking event. And the federation made a newsletter with the story where they flat out lied. And it says here, the Federation, shortly after the Ruffin incident, the Federation's newsletter carried a fictitious story designed to frighten those white women who had protested the racism manifested within their organization. According to Ida B. Wells' account, the article was entitled The Rushing In of Fools, and it described the pitfalls of integrated club life in a certain unnamed city. The president of the unidentified club had invited a black woman, whom she had befriended, to become a member of her group. But alas, the white woman's daughter fell in love and married the black woman's son, who, like his mother, was so light-complexioned as to be hardly recognizable as black. Yet, the article confided, he had that invisible drop of black blood, and when the young white wife gave birth to a jet black baby, the shock was so great that she turned her face to the wall and died.
Yeah. Imagine.
While any black person would realize that the story was contrived, the newspapers picked it up and widely disseminated the message that integrated women's clubs would result in the defilement of white womanhood. But I just like how ridiculous this story is. You let one black woman into your club, then all of your white daughters are going to be marrying their black sons who look white. And because we don't know how genetics work, all these babies are going to come out super dark-skinned black, and your daughters will die.
Yeah, die of shame.
Yeah.
I like couldn't stop laughing at that. I was like, in this story, she just died.
It's like so melodramatic and over the top, and people like bought it. Like this wasn't like it was manufactured outrage that actually worked.
No, that's what I'm saying when I'm like, this book is still so relevant. Like it's who is it? Is it John Green who was like, time or history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes? Is that a John Green quote? It's really good.
I don't know.
It's a good quote.
It's a good quote. But it's like the same thing where it's like, that's crazy pseudoscience to be like, and because this light-skinned black man is the one you had a child with, your baby will be the color of obsidian. But it's like, you still get people today who believe things like, oh, well, a woman can't conceive if she was raped because her body will just shut it down. It's like, no, like you were told something that's so wrong and you just flat out believe it. Like, it's still, it happens. Pseudoscience happens all the time.
Like the Great Replacement theory that like white supremacists are all like fired up about again. It's like, like it was like literally a problem for like hundreds of, like it's not new that like white people are like, but if we give rights to people who aren't like us, there will be more of them. Like what?
Oh, okay. Sorry. Hold on. I'm giving John Green too much credit. I've just Googled it and I think it's a Mark Twain quote. Oh. But he was probably quoting him. Probably John Green
And
said
I
Mark Twain.
like John Green more than Mark Twain anyway, so
I know.
it's fine.
I'm imagining, you know, that like Office thing where like Michael Scott has a quote by Wayne Gretzky and he like attributes it to Wayne Gretzky and then attributes it like the quote of the quote to himself.
Yeah.
History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. John Green, Mark Twain.
Mark Twain.
Yeah.
Mark Twain, John Green, I think would be the order.
Yeah, when they were talking about Thomas Malthus, I was like, oh my god, Paul Joseph Watson like talks about him, and even a lot of people now who don't understand why like sterilizing people or telling people they shouldn't be having babies has connections to eugenics, because they usually have a certain people in mind, and it's usually not white who they think should be stop having babies. Yeah. They're usually not white, and they're usually not middle or upper class.
Yeah, that was one of the things too that like I specifically was so struck by, is like Angela Davis does such a good job of like, again, this is like what we're talking about with like all the great context that she gives for everything that she talks about, where she is like talking about these issues or these movements and showing how important it is to listen to like other people about how they affect them. So like when she was talking about like the birth control movement and like right to choose and all of that, she's like, Black women are not saying they don't support it, but they're like, you need to understand the history of forced sterilization. So they are not going to be like explicitly pro-abortion in the same way. And also when she was talking about sexual assault, when she's like, again, Black women are very firmly in the like activism around stopping harassment and assault, but you have to understand how those accusations are weaponized against Black men. Like that is like the other side of the coin that white women need to be like equally as fired up about, and they often aren't. Like I thought that was like so good. And like there were like multiple times throughout the book where she's like, this is like, again, why it's important to have like so many different perspectives. Like, so anyway,
that chapter actually blew my mind, because there was that one white feminist woman who wrote about, I forgot their names, but it was like the something six.
Oh, okay. No,
yes. Yeah. And how, something like that, the Scottsboro 9. Yeah. And like they were proved innocent, like without a shadow of a doubt. And she was still like, yeah, but if they had done it, that would have been really bad.
Yeah.
And so, like,
it's like the Central Park vibe. Like it's just
And like with Emmett Till too, she was like, well, he did whistle at a woman, and you know, he could have raped her. So like it was bad that they like lynched him, but like maybe they stopped a rapist. And I'm like, what is this wild fantasy you have created?
Yes.
But I feel like the implication wasn't like maybe that whistle would have led to it. She was like, the whistle was like the little bell ringing to say he's going to. And it's like, that is such a wild assumption. Like, I don't support harassing women and wolf whistling at them, but it's like to say that one thing 100% leads to another is so wild.
Yeah. If Emmett Till even like whistled at her,
and he was a baby.
If that even happened,
he was a child. Yeah, he was a child. If he had, like, not to be boys will be boys, but if he had, it's like, okay, well, how old was he when he died?
14.
Yeah, like, okay, a 14-year-old whistled at you. That sucks. Hopefully his parents will teach him better. Move on.
Yeah.
But her going like, well, he could have. And it's like, he didn't.
He did. Well, and it's like, again, with things still being like so infuriatingly relevant, is like when people argue about like people who die in police brutality, who are like almost always Black people, and they're like, well, he did just rob a convenience store. And it's like, okay, even if he did, which probably didn't even happen, but even if he did, there is like nothing you can steal that would make it okay for you to be murdered, like just outright murdered by a police officer. Like there is nothing, there is no like forgery or like, you know, theft, anything like that. There is no property damage, no like fleeing the scene of a crime, like whatever excuse you want to use, like there is nothing like that can be like, well, he had it coming because he forged a $20 bill. Like what?
Or the
Well,
wild
you
thing
hear
is like going into like prior convictions that there's no way like the officer would know of unless he like recently looked up that person in the database. And we know they're not doing that all the time. But like people will go into their past and go like, well, in 1995 they got arrested for like cocaine possession, so they're no angel. And it's like, yeah, in 1995, this is like 2023.
Yeah.
And regardless, even if for some reason you think this person is morally reprehensible, literally in a legal sense, nothing that they have done previously or just did would warrant that, because everyone is due to a fair trial, due process, like the whole 9 yards. That's literally the law. So
Yeah.
it's like, I'm getting heated, okay?
Yeah.
I figured this
Oh,
would
that was the
couple
other
off. Yeah, go.
The other thing about this book, I was like, this book really makes me miss my AP Gov class in high school, because we would always do these like simulated debates where he'd be like, okay, the year is whatever, like 1784, and Julia and Chris, you represent the representatives of North Carolina, and so you're this, and we're all going to talk about this issue today. And I was like, bring it on. Like, it just really made me miss that, because I was like,
Yeah.
with the stuff she's saying, like, I would love to have a debate right now with anyone.
I just want to like make everyone read this. Like, it's just
Yeah.
like, and that's another thing that is like so frustrating. So I just recently started How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith. So
I
like,
really want to read that.
it's so good so far. These are very much like, I mean, I don't know that I would say he's like specifically influenced by her, but like, how could you not if you're talking about these issues? Like, they're both excellent so far. And one of the things he talks about too is like people getting angry at this like revision of history. And it's like, it's not though. It's the opposite. We are taking the revisions away. Like, I don't know. Not that that's the biggest issue here, but that is something that like really annoys me when people act like, well, you want to be politically correct. It's like, no, we want to be correct. Like, this is what actually happened. So the
Yeah.
fact that we are changing the way we talk about things is a good thing. It means we are being more accurate and more truthful. Like, you mentioned George Washington. It's like, we learned in school that he had slaves, that he like had enslaved people, but we were told that his teeth were made out of wood. And it wasn't until I was in like college that it's like, no, actually those were enslaved people's teeth that he took. So it's like, that is the revisionism, is that like he had wooden teeth. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
fired
gross
up, like,
either way.
Or like
Yeah.
he was like a good person. And it's like you can still have someone who did great things.
Yeah.
Like no one can deny that, he's a very significant figure in American history. He laid the precedent for the 2-term limit. And yeah, like stuff like that is great. He also owned slaves and he had children with his slaves, which means he like raped his slaves.
Mhm.
And we can talk about both things and separate them and also put them together into one very complex person.
Mhm.
Yes. That's one of like, there's this really great line that of course I can't remember from How the Word is Passed in the first section where he's talking about Monticello, or maybe it's in the introduction, and he says something like that, is like, it's not about erasing what they did, but it's about talking about everything that they did,
Mhm.
and that's just history. That's just being honest. Like, it doesn't mean he wasn't our first president, but it means that
Right.
like, you have to talk about these things. Like, it just doesn't make sense not to. And it's like, if you really care about history, that means that you care about Black history. That means that you care about women's history, because all of
Mhm.
these things are part of history. It's not like a specialty interest. Like, if you are interested in American history, that means you should care about African American history and
Mhm.
like women's history and all of these other groups. Like, that's one of the things that I find like frustrating, is like when people act like this is only relevant if you are in that group. And it's like, first
Yeah.
of all, that's very privileged to be like, I don't have to think about racism. It's like, yeah, that's kind of the point. Like, but it just doesn't make sense, because it's like, if you actually are interested in any topic, like if you're interested in like science, for example, then you should care about women scientists. Like,
Yeah. yeah, it's, I mean, that's what I just love about this book, is just bringing together like all these people that we've never heard of with people that we have heard of, and like talking about the good and the bad, and like, you know, how they progressed certain movements, but also how they regressed movements. And I don't know, it just makes this really good sort of like gumbo or something.
Yeah. Well, because it's true either way, right? It's like you can talk about someone who, like, historically had a really negative impact on an area or a movement or a group of people or whoever, right? But then you could, like, look at them with a closer lens and be like, and he was a really great father. And that could be true. Like, he
Yeah.
was a great dad who did bad things societally, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, just like, you know, a good figure historically might have done bad things also, because people are
Well,
human.
it's like
right?
Alexander Hamilton, brilliant, interesting, accomplished so much, also a human dumpster fire. Like, what a piece of shit.
Yeah.
It's just like,
and it's fine to know that, and then also jam to the musical and
Yeah,
maybe cry a
exactly.
little when you watch it.
Oh my God. See, that is the thing. I don't know what it is about this book in particular. It made me want to reconsume all the media. I was like, I need to watch Hamilton. I need to watch Ragtime. I need to watch Parade. I need to go to Epcot, to the America Pavilion, and watch the American Experience. Because I remember it has the little Susan B. Anthony animatronic giving her little speech. And I'm like, I need to know what she says. What does Susan say in that little animatronic speech? Like, it just got me so jazzed about everything.
It really did. I was like, I should check out Newsies or something.
Oh my God, I love Newsies. But again, a great example of like so much like good class issues. Like, where was the race? Where was the sexism? We need this in the story. Like, clearly inextricable, and yet they're not. Where are they?
Yeah.
No boys of color here, huh?
Speaking of class, Susan B. Anthony and I think Katie Stanton was involved, encouraging women to be scabs during a strike.
Yeah.
I was
It's like this
honey.
Yeah. Like, this is like the same energy of like trying to explain the concept that like voting for women's rights does not mean voting for any woman who runs. Like, there are some very, very anti-women women. We have several on our Supreme Court. It's fine. Or one I'm thinking of. But yeah.
Wait, can I share something so random right now?
Yes.
So my friend and I recently, Cara, you know this, we went to see Jagged Little Pill, which is touring. I have season tickets with my mom for Broadway in Detroit, so we went to go see it. But I went with my friend. And as we're leaving, we heard someone be like, oh, let's take a picture. This is my wife. And it was just like weirdly audible. And we're like, who is, like, the whole audience is leaving. You know, it's that big like mass exodus of people. Like, who would stop and take a picture in all that chaos? So we both turn around to be like, huh? And then we both look, process, and I so loudly, don't ask me why I got so quiet in a theater full of people. I was like, is that Gretchen Whitmer? Who's our governor? And it was. Our governor was at the show.
Oh my God.
It was so loud. And I was like, okay, sorry, bye.
Gretchen Whitmer does seem very cool. I have to agree. Like,
I was excited she was there. I was like, look.
That's
hey!
wild.
Celebrity.
Yeah.
How far away were you from her?
Like 2 meters. So close.
Oh my God.
That's why I was like, ah. So, anyways, an unrelated story, but
no, totally
I love
fine. I loved it. I just like the scab thing really annoyed me because they were like, at least we're getting women in the workplace, and I'm like, honey,
Yes.
honey,
Yep.
you're a mess.
Yeah. It's like, again, like the concept of intersectionality. Shout out to Kimberly Crenshaw. I think she was the one who coined that, and we use it all the time. But it's like that is like such, you cannot do any kind of activism in isolation, or you end up hurting people. Like, Dana, I love that Julia uses the metric system.
I didn't.
Throwing
I
us a
don't
bone.
usually. That's how far I was from her. I was not 2 yards away. I was probably 2 meters away.
2 meters specifically. Yeah, I really love throughout the book, like, and this is probably related to like how good she is at showing like capitalism. Capitalism is like the root problem for so many things. But the way that she showed how like manufactured so many of these prejudices are, when she is talking about like the wealthy white landowners who very intentionally like not that the poor or working class white people were not like responsible for their own beliefs, but like they very specifically like fed them these ideas about like, well, at least you're not a black person, and because they
Yeah.
knew that if they banded together they could accomplish a lot and they could basically like overthrow their whole system.
Yeah.
And like I think that's something people don't always know, is like they came up with like racism and misogyny and all of these other ideas to justify things that were already happening. Like that was one of the things that I still need to read Stamped, but I read like, or the Stamped from the beginning, but I read the like version that Jason Reynolds worked on.
It's really good.
Which is fantastic too. And that was one of the things that I don't know if I had thought of it that way before, or like we definitely weren't taught it this way in schools, but like slavery came first and then they came up with racism to justify it. And like that makes such a difference. Like it's yeah, even like people who, you know, are saying these horrible things with their whole chest, it's like it was a convenient excuse. I don't know where I'm going with this. I just like monologuing
it's
about
good.
how amazing Angela Davis is. Like
I mean, like I agree with what you're saying, that a lot of these things are fake. Like race is fake. Like, yes, we can see the difference between people of different races, but like overall the structure of it, the way it exists in our society, it's fake. Like with what I mentioned earlier, how Italian people and Irish people were not considered white for a long time. And then
that was
because
the other thing.
they started
I was like, I
teaming
need
up,
to reread A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Okay, sorry, carry on.
But then like when, you know, the Anglo-Saxon, I guess, group, which is I guess what they sort of called themselves, we're like, you know what, they can do a lot if they band together. So you know what, Irish and Italians are white now.
yeah.
And like it's just wild that they just sort of like did that, and as a way to sort of separate these two groups that had a lot in common.
Yeah, what was the part in the book? Oh no, I'm going to butcher it if I can't remember it correctly. When they were talking about getting the right to vote. And it was like, oh, but see, if we get these like 40, 4 million, whatever it was, like people to vote, then their votes for you. So of course you want them to have the right to vote. Maybe it was just like the political party or whatever.
It was very transactional.
Yeah, that's like, how they got a lot of like Democrat men,
because they're going to vote for you.
Yeah. Or when they were like, you should vote to give white women the right to vote because they'll cancel out all the votes of the black people who already theoretically can vote. Like,
I think that's what I was thinking of. TBH. Yeah. See, I told you I was going to butcher the quote, but I was like,
yeah, the oppression math. It's wild.
I know.
Let me see if I have any questions that we haven't gone over.
I know. Okay. I feel like you've asked us one question. And
I did, and we just went up. I kind of like expected that to like happen, sort of, because it's just a book that lends itself to a lot of conversation.
Yes, for sure.
This is not a question and answer session. This is a filibuster, and
yeah.
So one question I had with you was, so I should mention that some of these questions were based off of this like website called Threa Bernab Virtual Book Club Reads, just because I had questions I wanted to ask and I had no idea how to phrase them. Yeah. And so their questions were very good. But one of them was, what does womanhood mean to us today? How does slavery set the standards for a new womanhood? And how does challenging and dismantling the gender binary advance the greater collective struggle for liberation? So it's a little bit of what Angela Davis discussed in her book, but also with a new idea that we're now redefining womanhood and what it means to, you know, break out of the gender binary and so on, which Angela Davis did not cover the gender as a concept in her book. It was 1983, so I'm not super well versed on what the conversation was back then, but I do know we've had like the gay rights movement, like that's already in effect. So, you know, I don't want to be like, this book is bad because she didn't talk about XYZ. But I do think it is something that if she had written it today, I wonder if she would have thought to include, like the fact that, you know, womanhood has been defined by a lot of things. So, like, you know, we have the idea of Black womanhood being like, oh, Black women are strong and they're here for the use of like white men and they're inherently more promiscuous and seductive. And you know, white women are these angels and they're mothers and oh my god, they're so cool. But you know, this
classic
idea
stereotype. Oh, white women, they're so cool. No, I got you. Carry on.
No, that's fine. But you know, I wanted to know what you guys thought about how the term womanhood has been used and shifted, and you know, let's bring it up to today a bit too.
Oh. That is a really good question. I gotta process my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those questions that has like 10 other questions.
There's many.
Yeah. One thing it made me think of was the part at the beginning of this book that we were talking about specifically with the different portrayals of womanhood. And like Taylor, like you were saying, this stereotype about Black women being so strong, but it's in a way that can still be like very offensive and like, you know, patronizing and all of that. And it made me think of one of the first chapters in this book where it's talking about the different portrayals of womanhood, whether you were white or Black, like you were viewed differently. And like the cult of motherhood and the cult of domesticity versus like for Black women, that was at that time, that was something that was more like empowering. And so going back to one of the later parts of the question, it's like, how does like deconstructing the gender binary advance everyone? I think it's like similarly to a lot of the movements that Angela Davis talks about. It's like, it's not about to be liberated, you have to do this or you have to be free to do this. It's like the freedom to choose what to do. And if you are a woman who wants to be a stay-at-home mom, you can do that. If you are a woman who wants to work, you can do that. If you want to work and have children, like that's what feminism should mean, and that's what all movements should mean. So like that's kind of what the like looking at the gender binary made me think of, how it's not that like white women should not be stay-at-home moms or that Black women should only work outside the home. It's about having the choice to do either of those. So
yeah, exactly, very well put.
Yeah, I have two very separate thoughts in my head that I just have to, I got to take one by one because they're not really that well connected. Kind of related to the part you're talking about, Cara. Like I loved in the chapter that's all about like birth control and you know things like that. Like the phrase voluntary motherhood, I was like, that is the simplest yet most ingenious pairing of words I've ever heard, because that's all it is. Whether you're married, whether you're single, however you identify, if you would like to have a baby, you're able to. And if you don't want to, you shouldn't have to. And just like that very simple phrase, I was like,
exactly.
Holy moly. Yeah, that. So, sorry, just connecting that to that. And then more back to the original question that was asked in terms of like more contemporary views of gender and that whole spectrum in which it encompasses. I think it's probably worth noting too that because, you know, like trans issues and like, you know, gender nonconforming and all those different types of people who existed but weren't really like in the mainstream discussion throughout history up to even the point when Angela Davis was writing this, I'm sure. Like there could be people that she cited in this book that like we don't even know that they, you know, considered themselves trans or non-binary. Like actually Nana and I were talking about like Little Women, and she was like, was Louisa May Alcott trans? And I was like, I can't prove no, but I can't prove yes. Like, you know, things like that. You know, just because I think at that time it was people and way before in the past too, it was like people who just lived their lives more in like a way that was considered alternative and not the norm, people were like, whoa, they're really edgy and weird. It's like, no, they just didn't know how to express like,
Yeah.
I don't feel like what you expect of me. So do you hear Chester sneeze?
Yeah, I did.
Bless you.
What are you doing? He's been like asleep this whole time. So, oh, good stretch. Let's judge.
Yeah.
A little shout out to Chester. Where are you? There you go.
Oh my god.
Oh, good stretch.
Oh, oh my god.
That's the
Chester
boy.
said women's rights.
Yeah.
I was like, Chester's an intersectional feminist. Like,
Okay, literally, he is like bothering me right now because he's like, you should be giving me dinner. He has food in his bowl that he refuses to eat, and I'm just gonna replace it with the exact same type of food. Oh, okay. Let me go let him outside and see if that helps him. Carry on with the conversation.
So I was also thinking with the idea of like defining like motherhood. Oh, sorry. Nana says here, I thought voluntary motherhood meant that it's like a volunteer job because you don't get paid. Which honestly is also very true.
Yeah. I have a thought on that section after you say what you were going to say, Taylor.
I was going to say I see like sort of, there's a difference now in that womanhood can mean many things, and even motherhood can mean many things. Like there are people who don't identify as women or mothers who give birth to children, and they also have to figure out how to navigate the sort of like how the US handles reproductive care and how like, society takes in people who give birth who don't fit what we consider to be like a mother. And how like isolating that must be, and how like there aren't a lot of protections for people who give birth who aren't cis, or I guess cis presenting. I don't know, it's just made me think about how like the definition of womanhood both for different races, and you also have the distinction between like middle class and upper class women and working women, and how that sort of motherhood and womanhood work differently for them too. And now it's like there's no one definition of motherhood and no one definition of womanhood, and we have so many other genders that we know of now, and we discuss now. I don't know, I'm just rambling because I think
it's like I feel like this book just leads to like so many just like thought monologues almost. It's like, wow, just like brilliant. Like, so I totally understand. And the part that Nana, like, she was laughing because like, yeah, voluntary motherhood, you don't get paid, which like is true. And it made me think of like that section near the end where she's talking about like the unpaid work of like housekeeping and being a stay-at-home mom and everything. Yeah. And like this is another great thing where it's like she actually like changed my mind about something, or like she like put it in such a way that I'm like, I hadn't thought about it, but yeah, because when she's talking about, I forget what the name of the movement is, but it's basically like pay us for our work at home, and I was like, yeah, they should, like that's exactly what should happen. But then like when Angela Davis explains it, it's like, okay, yeah, but you can't fix this issue with capitalism. Like the issue is that people are having to put so much meaningless emphasis on this. Like there's like so much time that you invest in something that could be like automated, like that was just one of those things where it's like, yeah, you're right. Like I can't like when she was initially talking about it, I was like, I don't know, it sounds like that would be a good way to fix it. But then by the end I was like, you're right, Angela, you can't fix it with capitalism. Like,
I need to address that final chapter because as someone who lives alone and hence has all the housework on them and also loathes every single form of housework, but also ironically would be like, I'd be a great stay-at-home mom. Okay, you liar. You'd be a great stay-at-home mom. You'd be a terrible housewife. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a difference.
Yeah.
That chapter, I like went on such a journey. Okay, because the thing was, okay, I need to talk about, well, okay, because it's like, it's so interesting to think about because what'd you say? She wrote this. This was published in 83?
83 or 81.
Early
80s.
Early 80s. So like this is like the burgeoning time of like women working outside the home voluntarily, right? Like they wanted it. It wasn't like, oh, it's wartime, we need women to do the men's job. It was women being like, I can have a job. Like, I'm just going to do that and go for it.
Yeah.
So like really big, huge societal change. And this statistic, you don't understand. Did anyone else do the math on this? Because I instantly was like, I need to know. The chapter starts, the countless chores collectively known as housework, cooking, washing dishes, doing laundry, making beds, sweeping, shopping, etc., apparently consume some 3,000 to 4,000 hours of the average housewife's year. Pause. Did anyone else go, how much time actually is that?
I didn't, because I'm like, that sounds depressing.
I
Same.
I want to know. I did the math. If you, and see, here's the thing. I did 365 days times 12 hours because that's your waking hours, right? Like, I'm not going to count the 24 hours in a day because like everyone's allowed to like sleep. Okay.
Yeah.
So if we just did it based on like how many hours, if you got an amazing 12 hours of sleep every day for a year, you have like 4,310, something like that, waking hours. So at the bigger end of that spectrum, that is 91% of someone's waking hours doing housework. And I was like, I'm having like full body chills trying to wrap my brain around that statistic.
Okay, I'm in the same boat as you, Julia, where like I want to be a stay-at-home mom, and I'm like, I would make a great stay-at-home mom, not a great housewife. And you know what? I recognize, because Chris and I have someone who comes by and cleans like every other week, and I recognize that's a huge privilege.
Bless.
It's amazing. I love her so much.
I love that.
But like it's so nice, but I also recognize that it's a privilege because like I don't have to spend, I mean, not that I would be the only one doing it because Chris is also very good about doing his chores, but let's say we were currently like, I'm a housewife, he's going out working, like it takes away so much stress from like my chores, and like it does things like allows me to work a full-time job, and if I had a kid, it would give me more time to like take care of the kid and maybe work on like school with them and give them all that extra enrichment. And I don't know what I'm talking about, but
no, it's true.
Yeah. One of my
this isn't just me bragging about having I want to make sure that's not it. I recognize how privileged it is. How
You're a capitalist, Taylor.
No, I'm just lazy.
Yeah, no, I feel that.
Oh, wait, I love Nana's comment too. Yeah, I'd be a good housewife. One of my best friends in real life, like my best friend from high school, she recently told me, because she's married, they've been married maybe like going on 6 or 7 years now, for a while. But yeah, they're trying to have a baby. And so, but she shared, she was like, I think I'll keep working and he wants to stay home. And I was like, I love you guys. This is amazing.
Yeah.
I know people were talking about like the stay-at-home girlfriend movement, but I watch those videos and I'm like, this is kind of nice.
Also, can we talk about how Angela Davis, well, I was going to say maybe unironically, maybe a little bit ironically, genuinely used the term house husband in this book. And I was like, Angela, you set the tone.
That's just my type, Angela. Like,
Yeah.
I think what helps, like, I'm very privileged to have grown up with, my parents could afford to, like, my dad was a teacher, but we were able to have him like work outside the home and my mom be a housewife. But one of the things that I always liked about my parents' marriage was, my dad has it's not a 9 to 5, but let's say 9 to 5, and my mom has her 9 to 5, like taking care of us and doing the housework. And then he comes home and they're both on duty until it's our bedtime. And like they both share those sort of chores equally. Like he'll do the laundry, she'll cook dinner. And it was something I always liked because it felt a little bit more like equal. Like it wasn't just divided along gender lines. It was like, well, this works for them, and they share that sort of like those household duties once they're both off the clock.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was the thing in that chapter too, was she's like, it's not about like a man helping with the housework. No, you're not helping. It's also yours. Like you
also, like you're not babysitting if it's your own child.
Exactly.
That always makes me so angry. Like, no, you had the child. That's yours.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, is your wife going out and she's paying you to stay home with the kids? Okay, so you're not babysitting. Like
yeah. Yep.
So we are getting to the end of my questions because we've answered all of them. So before we go into quotes, I wanted to ask, did you have a favorite essay or one that you found more compelling than the others?
Ooh, okay, hold on. Let me look at the list real quick.
Yeah, I need to look at the essays too.
Okay, I think, so many things. Okay. I mean, the last one does stand out to me in the fact that it was not like truly an outlier from the rest of the essays, but like it just wasn't a conversation like I fully anticipated in this book, and so I really appreciated it. But I think maybe the one that taught me the most would probably be a couple of like the early middle ones are like so interconnected for me. I feel like 3 through 6 are all very like ones where I was like, I am learning so much right now.
Yeah. I feel especially like some of the earlier ones, like chapter 2 was when I got really pulled in because we're going through all of these things that I had never heard of or like I knew about vaguely, like the abolitionist movement. But I never really had a lot of like these new names that I had never heard before or like all of this background that they don't really teach. I also really liked Education and Liberation, Black Women's Perspective.
Yeah.
You know, I come from a family of teachers, so learning has always been like seen as something very important to us, especially like on my mom's side of the family where it wasn't always accessible to us. My mom's Black. I figured people would figure that out, but I wanted to give that context. And like, I don't know. I just thought it was really interesting to see like this push for Black education and people being scared or nervous about it because it's like, oh my God, once they learn how to read, they'll start thinking. And once they start thinking, maybe they'll start being like, hey, this racism thing is a little whack, don't you think? It's things are a little off here.
Already thinking that, I promise you. Like they're not just gonna suddenly.
Yeah, like they've been new.
That is like so true that was even the thought though, because I feel like that is still, again, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes, right? Like I'm gonna keep using it. So,
it's a good quote. It's a good quote.
Where like I feel so many modern issues are still not looked at that logically because whatever side is opposing the change is using those similar fear tactics of like, well, it would be nice if they could read, but then they're going to take over because they'll be so educated. You know, it's like people will take something that seems really rational and then be like, but it's this group of people that once we let them do this, then this. And it's like, I don't think anyone is like, I don't know why you suspect like this one group of people has such nefarious motives. I promise you they just want a basic human right, you know?
Yeah.
Also, like, why are you so worried about other people being educated? Does that mean that you know that some of them could like give you a run for your money? Like, is it?
Yeah.
Because that's also coupled with like being very condescending about like how they're not intelligent. And it's like, well, okay, if they're not, then why are you worried?
Then what's the harm? Give them a book.
Yeah.
And it also sort of ties into like a sort of earlier push, but like women also used to not be educated as well either.
Mm-hmm.
They were told to like read the basics so they could read the Bible,
Yeah.
and that was it. So like the book didn't talk about this, but it did make me think about like even older pushes for like literacy amongst women, and how like, you know, white men were like nervous to like see an educated woman, and they still were back then. Sometimes some of them still are now, but like it was just very, very interesting to see that connection again between like a, an issue that was once considered a woman's issue, and now it's like, you know, Black people want to be able to read and get educated, and people are barring them from doing that while also saying they're too dumb to do it.
Right. It's she talks about like the illogic of racism all the time, and I think that's a great example of it. I'm cheating. I have like multiple essays to mention. It's like if I
named
gave
like
it
5.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, I gave 3.
Perfect. The chapter 2, essay 2, the anti-slavery movement and the birth of women's rights, because that is a period that I've read a lot more about than some of the others, but I was still like, obviously there was still a lot to learn, and it had a lot of examples that I hadn't heard of specifically, which was cool. I also really liked number 5, the meaning of emancipation according to Black women, and I just think that one did such a good job of again demonstrating why if your movement leaves people out, you're not really going to understand what you're fighting for. And I think this was also the one where she talks about the convict lease system, which makes a lot of sense because Angela Davis is also big on prison abolition. I don't know if she had written about that a lot before this essay or not, but that's like another thing where I'm like, I remember reading the actual text of the amendment that like emancipated enslaved people, and like reading the actual words for the first time and being like, oh my God, they literally say we can still enslave you if you're in prison. So that chapter like really affected me. And then also another one that I just think, again, it's not that I didn't know this, but I think this was one of the most like, this is a topic that I think a lot of people who view themselves as progressive still don't really get. And that's number 11, rape, racism, and the myth of the Black rapist. I think
that was
is
really
like,
good.
yeah. And it just demonstrates like so many of the things that Angela Davis does brilliantly throughout the whole book, because it's not like she's excusing, like, and even Frederick Douglass is like, yes, there have been Black men who have sexually assaulted women, but you don't understand the way that is often weaponized against them. So
yeah.
And just that one simple line where she says, like, there is literally not one documented case of a Black man raping a woman during the Civil War where there would have been ample opportunity. It's like, I think that really says it all. Like,
like that's like, I didn't know that. I'm not, and it's not like I would have expected there to be some, but it's like that was never talked about. And I think that is so,
like, statistically you would think like, okay, maybe there could have been, but the fact that they cannot find one, it's like, I think that speaks volumes.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I agree with you, Cara. It's like not something that you think about, but like that's what I thought was so brilliant. Is like it's not something I would have thought about like as evidence. I just would have like, it's such a great piece of evidence. Like, nothing, as far as we know, nothing happened. So
and
when
this
they
was
had
at a
ample
point when
opportunity,
it's like, and this was at a point where it's like, you know, if like a Black man even like looked at a white woman too long, you know, somebody would have been like accusing him of doing that. So the fact that there's not even an accusation, like, pretty wild. Also interesting because that makes me think, and obviously white women accuse Black men of this all the time, but it also is interesting because it makes me think like the fact that most of the white men were gone, and it's like, the kind of origin of that myth is from white supremacist men who kind of get, you know, and again, not to absolve white women of making this up because they definitely do as well, but I thought she, like, that would be such, in a way, a difficult topic to talk about, because it's not like you want to say don't believe victims, but the way, like, I just think she did such a good job of like talking about, like, she kept describing it as like the other side of the coin, or like the other side of that issue, and it's like, like the problem of assault is like deeply connected to the weaponizing of assault accusations to Black men. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I thought she did a really good job of like presenting both like issues without making
yes.
it seem like she was dismissing
Yes,
either
exactly.
one.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone else had anything else to say, but we can go into quotes.
Here we go.
Sure.
Also, sorry, just to mention, her talking about like communist women, that chapter where she broke it down into different people was so great. I loved that.
Yeah, I liked that too. I saved a quote that Cara generally mentioned a couple times about like Black women during slavery, but how their like housework was such a different dynamic from white women. I love this quote. In the infinite anguish of ministering to the needs of the men and children around her, she was performing the only labor of the slave community which cannot be directly and immediately claimed by the oppressor. Precisely through performing the drudgery which has long been the central expression of the socially conditioned inferiority of women, the Black woman in chains could help to lay the foundation for some degree of autonomy, both for herself and her men. Even though she was suffering under the unique oppression as female, she was thrust into the center of the slave community. She was, therefore, essential to the survival of the community.
Yes.
It's really good.
And that's like the first essay, right? She's like
It's
starting
so
out like
it.
right
That's
out of the gate.
Page
Like
17. I was like,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. This one I thought was so beautiful. So this is from Education and Liberation, a Black Women's Perspective, and it's talking about how passionately Black women are fighting for the right to education. They must have understood how urgently Black women needed to acquire knowledge, a lamp unto their people's feet and a light unto the path toward freedom.
You took my quote, Carolyn.
Oh, I'm sorry. And during Black History Month too.
I know.
Like, damn it, Carol. What's wrong with you?
Give it back. No, you're good. I have so many like here. I don't know if anyone else had another one to share while I look for mine.
But I don't have the page for it, so I'm trying to give it context. So I'm like hunting it down right now.
Yeah. Do we want to just like go around in like circles because I
Yeah.
think we all have a few.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Taylor's next.
Oh God! If you have one to share now, go ahead and share it because I still need to find mine.
Okay.
This one.
The increasingly influential expediency argument proposed by Anthony and her colleagues was a feeble justification for the suffragists' indifference to the pressing requirements of the times. That one is more like, not so much that it's beautifully written, but it's like, what a great encapsulation of like 95% of the problems that she talks about. It's like,
yeah. Okay, I have one. Sorry.
No, don't be.
It's just a tiny little quote, but it says it's talking about the sexual violence against Black women. But Angela writes, one of racism's salient historical features has always been the assumption that white men, especially those who wield economic power, possess an incontestable right of access to Black women's bodies. And I just really like those who wield economic power, because I feel like a lot of times classism will come into it like, oh, well, that's just like the poors, you know, they have no self-control. And it's like, no, it was these affluent, very like influential white men who were doing this as well.
Yeah, that just reminded me, Taylor, one of the other things I really liked in the section about reproductive rights, when she was talking about, I forget if it was like a specific figure, but basically the idea that like this is going to be great for everyone because then poor women can stop having so many children. And it's one of those things that it's like, this is still something people talk about all the time. Like they're like, well, why did they have, like, they're talking about a family who lives in poverty. And they're like, well, why do they have like 7 children? You know, like, and it's something where like, yes, I like definitely poorer families do not have the same access to like reproductive health care and, you know, like birth control, like all of that. So that is true. But the way people talk about it can sometimes sound like we need to stop them from breeding so much. Like,
yeah. And it's like, it doesn't matter. They still have a human right to.
and also it's like, okay, well, if you want to do a little presentation on like, here's, you know, the planet is suffering, we should work on our population control kind of thing. But that doesn't change the fact that like these kids deserve to eat. Like, you don't.
Yeah.
That's my favorite like debate topic, is when people are like, well, we're not for abortion, but we're also not for birth control. I'm like, okay, so you don't want them to have more babies, but when they do have more babies, then you're like, but we're not going to help take care of the babies. It's like, well, we need to do something in between here, because clearly you hate both these scenarios.
Yeah.
So like the only choice is like abstinence for your entire life, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, that's the solution. You're so poor, you're not allowed to have sex now. Did you know?
Yeah. And they're also against more comprehensive sex education too, which studies show that people who have more access to like knowledge about sex tend to abstain from sex until like they're ready. This is mostly for teenagers, but you know, I think it still holds
in general.
Yeah, and if you get the right person like me, you can scare them away from anything. I hate trouble. I don't want any part of it. I didn't drink on my 21st birthday. I was like, I'm not interested. Like, like, I just don't want any trouble here. You just gotta sell it. Okay, so the quote that I was hunting for, the reason I was hunting for it was because it was a quote of a quote, right? So it wasn't an Angela Davis, and I was like, I need the context of who was saying this. So it's from the section about the early women's rights campaign. And this is from Charlotte Woodward, who was a glove maker. So she was a worker, but not in an industrial setting. Kara already knows. It's a good quote.
Yeah.
So what she had said was, we women work secretly in the seclusion of our bedchambers because all society was built on the theory that men, not women, earned money and that men alone supported the family. I do not believe that there was any community in which the souls of some women were not beating their wings in rebellion. For my own obscure self, I can say that every fiber of my being rebelled, although silently, all the hours that I sat and sewed gloves for a miserable pittance which, as it was earned, could never be mine. I wanted to work, but I wanted to choose my task and I wanted to collect my wages. That was my form of rebellion against the life into which I was born. Whew, girl. Charlotte.
I love it. And like, just another great example of how it's not like women didn't know they were suffering until like Susan B. Anthony showed up. It's like, I'm pretty sure there were women in ancient Rome who like looked around, they're like, this is bullshit. Like, but I can't do anything about it. Yeah. Okay,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I also have some that are like quotes of quotes, but I'm sharing my Angela ones first. This is from Women's Suffrage at the Turn of the Century, The Rising Influence of Racism. Okay, where is it? Had Anthony seriously reflected on the findings of her friend Ida B. Wells, she might have realized that a non-committal stand on racism implied that lynchings and mass murders by the thousands could be considered a neutral issue. This is one of the things I get like most fired up about, is our like obsession with the concept of neutrality. And I'm like, there's like a lot of things where you should not be neutral, and you like, it is impossible to be neutral, because if you say you're neutral about this, that means that you're helping the people who are doing the bad things. Like, it just gets me very upset.
And also, it's a lot of people like hype up being neutral as like being the more like rational option.
Yes.
And it not always is, though.
Exactly.
Usually it's not.
I dare say the opposite. If the more neutral you are, I'm like, you're an irrational person.
Yeah.
Why don't you care?
Like, have one opinion, I beg of you.
Yeah. Even if it's the wrong opinion, I'll take it.
Yeah, at least you said something.
At least you recognize that this is a moral issue. Like, it has implications.
So this quote, which is just before that quote I shared earlier about the woman being called out about having domestic workers and not really caring about their hours and stuff.
Yeah.
But right before that, Angela writes, white women, feminists included, have revealed a historical reluctance to acknowledge the struggles of household workers. They have rarely been involved in the Sisyphean task of ameliorating the conditions of domestic service. The convenient omission of household workers' problems from the programs of middle-class feminists past and present has often turned out to be a veiled justification, at least on the part of the affluent women, of their own exploitative treatment of their maids, which I thought was really good in pointing out, like, again, the hypocrisy of, like, well, we care about these women, but I really need my bed made, so...
Right. Well, and I didn't realize, although it makes sense because, again, it's like women's work, but that it's one of the positions that has had the most difficulty unionizing. Like, people do not want to let them have a union.
Yeah.
Probably because, like, a lot of people recognize that the conditions are awful and they do not get paid what they should.
Exactly, yeah. I just thought, like, that was a very interesting point, and, like, you know, sometimes I do think, like, and not enough because, like, I feel like a lot of texts haven't really encouraged a lot of thought into, like, social class, but, like, how are the women who are doing, like, domestic labor or, like, women's chores in the household, like, how are they doing? Like, they don't really have the dangers of a factory life, but they're still working long hours with, like, little to no, like, breaks, and you're basically at your boss's beck and call.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of physical labor that goes into housework too.
Yes.
Yeah. I know. It's so wild that, like, societally, I mean, this is like the continual thing, but it's like the jobs that people want to do the least are the jobs they're wanting to pay them the least for. And I'm like, no, I don't think you understand how this works. Like,
yeah. Or
yeah,
it's like they call something unskilled labor, and I'm like, can you do that? Like,
yeah.
Just
or are you
because
even
it's
willing to do that? Because
yes,
if so,
like,
it's valuable to you.
yeah, like, just because it's a skill that you don't have or that you don't think is as impressive, like, that's not the same thing as being unskilled. Like, it takes skill to do any job. And in fact, like, some of the, like, least paid positions are ones where it's like, I think this would be like a very, like, high intensity, like, high learning curve job. Like,
it's some of the jobs that pay the most, like, they do nothing.
CEOs, like, I also sports players, don't get me started. Like, I'm like, there is, like, no sport in the world that I think you could be good enough to deserve, like, a multi-million-dollar, like, $10 million salary a year. Like, I'm sorry, did you cure cancer? Like, what are you?
See, but the thing with sports players is you can even argue, like, well, they're putting their bodies, like, on the line.
I was going to say, the only thing I will allow for athletes is, like, especially, like, things like football, where it's like you get these players who are, like, dealing with, like, concussions and then have lifelong repercussions. I'm like, okay, but still multiple millions of dollars.
You're right. It's like they should absolutely be, like, well compensated, and it is, you know, definitely a skill and everything.
Or
but
just, like,
it's
change the rules so it's not
just the amount is absurd. Like,
what if we just didn't have football? Because
like, truly, our America's obsession with a sport that, like, destroys people's brains, and we have known this for years, is like, what is wrong with us?
And people let their kids do it.
Also, Taylor, is the reason that you and I both brought up that issue immediately is because we're thinking of the right swipe. Because that's what I think.
Oh,
I think
yes.
Of football.
Okay, yes.
I'm like, but think of their poor brains.
Somewhere there's a very large, very sweet man who's at risk.
Julia, do you have another quote?
I do. So this is from The Meaning of Emancipation According to Black Women. It's actually at the very, very end of it, because it is talking about, well, the context, just like the sentence before, is like, the changes prompted by the Second World War provided only a hint of progress, right? Because that's like when women started working. And the quote itself, after 8 long decades of, literally in quotes, emancipation, The signs of freedom were shadows so vague and so distant that one strained and squinted to get a glimpse of them. This is one of those instances where I was like, oh, Angela, the word choice, beautiful, horrible, but beautiful.
Yeah, and then I think this is my last Angela one, but I have a couple of like primary source quotes that I just love. This is from the chapter that's on the myth of the Black rapist. Susan Brown Miller's discussion on rape and race evinces an unthinking partisanship which borders on racism. In pretending to defend the cause of all women, she sometimes boxes herself into the position of defending the particular cause of white women, regardless of its implications. Like, what a mission statement. I just want to get that, like, on billboards. Like, it's like,
I thought you were gonna say get that tattooed. I'm like,
no.
That too.
Like, it just makes me, as we've been discussing, it's like we're getting very fired up about these, but it's like people who don't realize when you think you're talking about all women, like, you're really not, and in fact you are hurting other women. Or people in general. So you tell them, Angela.
Did you want to share some of your primary source quotes, Cara? And Julia, if you have any?
I have one more from Angela, because that last one, the last chapter about housework, she snapped. I love it. I was like, I hate housework, and I love how you're describing it. I'm like holding my book as if I don't have the quote right here on my phone. Invisible, repetitive, exhausting, unproductive, and uncreative. These are the adjectives which must perfectly capture the nature of housework. Like, literally, the fact even that she says unproductive, like, that is so not revolutionary. What's the word I'm looking for? Just like what word is it? Just like turning it on its head, you know? Because people are like subversive. Yes, that's so subversive of her, because she's like, you know, a lot of people in the world like have this view. I'm sorry, I'm going to go on a tangent right now. I recently watched a TED Talk called, I'm paraphrasing, but it was like cleaning your house when you're depressed. Something to that nature. And she was like, you can't place morality on housework, right? Like, having a sink full of dishes doesn't make you a bad person. Having a pile of laundry does not make you inferior to your friend who has all their laundry clean, right? So things like that. And it's like, you just have to do things in a way that works for you and your lifestyle. So to literally say housework is unproductive is like revolutionary. I said I didn't mean it, but I also do mean it. It's like, yeah, you know, it is unproductive because you do it and then you undo it. This is why I refuse to make my bed.
I have had like conversations with people before where it's like, this is, I guess, not something everyone experiences, I guess, but like, not to overstate it, but it's like sometimes I get like depressed almost, like for lack of a better word, because I am doing something that is so mind numbing, like washing like dishes or like doing, and I'm like, I will have to do this every day until I die. Like, that's just like really depressing for me. Like, and that's, it's like it's too little to call it boredom. Like, it's not boredom, but it's like a similar vibe. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but it's like,
no, I get it.
It's still sucking. That's what it is.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's a reason why I made sure our home came with the dishwasher and an in-unit washer dryer, because I was like, I hate washing dishes, and I will never leave my home or my apartment to go downstairs and do laundry, because then I just won't do it. I will just be stinky forever.
Oh my gosh, you guys, I just found our last meme of the live show, which is the how could you say something so controversial yet so brave? And it's about
I love it.
That. I love that. Yes. Nina. Yeah.
Okay, listen. Okay. I love this family of dogs sitting for it. They clearly have a very nice home. You're only seeing one room of it, right? They have 2 dishwashers. That is so bougie and enviable. They have
2?
2 dishwashers. If I showed you the other side of the counter I'm sitting on, there is a sink, and on either side there is a dishwasher. So just like think about that for a minute. The luxury of running your dishwasher, not having to put the clean dishes away immediately, but being able to also load the dishwasher with dirty dishes.
Oh my god.
Wow.
Genius.
Yeah.
So privileged, but genius.
Oh my god.
Oh, I'm so out of weight balance now. I'm a ghost.
Women racing class was so good, it killed you.
Yeah.
Your soul literally left your body. Like
Talking about dishes, yeah.
Julia.
That is usually my Twitter name during Halloween. So yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Okay. I have some quotes now.
Yes,
and if you guys have more, please jump in so it's not just me talking.
Those are my big ones. I'm
yeah. I mean, I read the silly little story one, and I read the person calling their friend out one.
That's like one of my favorite. Like, I'm just picturing a headline like "Local woman roasts her friend." Like, it's like that. I came out to have a good time, and I'm honestly feeling so attacked. Like, except it'd be like I came out to do a good thing, and I'm honestly feeling. Anyway, it's true though, and her friend should say it. Like,
yeah.
Okay. It is related of Bonaparte that he one day rebuked a French lady for busying herself with politics. Sire, replied she, in a country where women are put to death, it is very natural that women should wish to know the reasons why.
I love that one too.
That one's so good.
Yeah. Okay. I know we have others.
A lot of these pull quotes made me want to read like her sources like themselves.
Yes.
I added so many random things on Goodreads while reading this book you don't even know. I was like, oh, what's that Irish woman's name who was like a socialist? I was like, I'm reading your autobiography.
Yeah.
I added, I don't know, Cara, if you're already looking for your quotes.
Go if you've got
I won't interrupt. I literally added, oh, these are all out of order. Cool. You know when Goodreads is suddenly like, you want to view these by average rating, right? And I'm like, no, I don't. When do I ever?
When have I ever wanted that?
I never asked for that. Hi, what do you need? Bless you.
What a sneezy boy.
Yeah, I added sociology of housework. I added the Rebel Girl, an autobiography. Oh, maybe just those 2. I looked up a lot more.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, I really loved the statement or like the manifesto that, let's see, Jessie Daniel Ames and her co-founders of the Association of Southern Women for the Prevention of Lynching resolved in 1930 to recruit the masses of Southern white women into the campaign to defeat the racist mobs bent on killing Black people. Eventually, they obtained over 40,000 signatures to the association's pledge. We declare lynching is an indefensible crime, destructive of all principles of government, hateful and hostile to every ideal of religion and humanity, debasing and degrading to every person involved. Public opinion has accepted too easily the claim of lynchers and mobsters that they were acting solely in defense of womanhood. In light of facts, we dare no longer to permit this claim to pass unchallenged, nor allow those bent upon personal revenge and savagery to commit acts of violence and lawlessness in the name of women. We solemnly pledge ourselves to create a new public opinion in the South, which will not condone, for any reason whatever, acts of mobs or lynchers. We will teach our children at home, at school, and at church a new interpretation of law and religion. We will assist all officials to uphold their oath of office. And finally, we will join with every minister, editor, school teacher, and patriotic citizen in a program of education to eradicate lynchings and mobs forever from our land.
That's so good. Remind me who said that?
This was the Association of Southern Women for the Prevention of Lynching. And that was on page 195.
So good.
It's so good. And it's like, this is another one of those examples where, like, the coalition aspect worked, like, they were like, we need to bring Southern white women into this. And, like, they did. Like, obviously not all of them, but
Yeah.
there were enough that they were able to get 40,000 signatures for this, like, statement. Like,
Yeah.
it just,
Which is,
yeah.
like, not insignificant, especially, like,
No.
back then when the population in the South was not as much as it is now.
Right. Right. So just really like that one. Did Julia have to take care of a dog thing?
I think she did.
Love it.
Ah,
Yeah. I feel like
Julia's so
this like,
lucky.
what?
Julia's so lucky. Dog time.
Dog
He's
time.
such a little stinker. He's like huffing at me like, why aren't you giving me my dinner? I'm like, because you didn't eat anything except one bite of your breakfast. And so I put the food on top of the other food anyways. And he like sniffs it and he's like, and so I like put a piece, because it's like this canned dog food that's like a big old can. So I got to like cut it into smaller pieces. Otherwise it would look like cranberry sauce on Thanksgiving, just like,
yeah.
And so I like put a little piece on the knife and I'm like, it's a butter knife. I'm like, look, see, smell it. And he's like, and he eats that one piece that I offer him. And then he sniffs the dish and like refuses. Yeah, you. He's like talking. He's like, do you know? Are you talking about me? And he refuses to eat the rest of it. He's being such a little stinker.
He's like, if you hand feed me the pieces, I guess I can eat them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, no.
I offered him the second piece, and he was like, no. I just wanted that one bite. Boy. Can't stand him. Just kidding. He's a good boy.
Yeah.
But he's very picky. Oh. Bless you.
Did you have any other quotes you wanted to share, Julia?
I'm good.
What about you, Cara?
I might have. Let's end with another Frederick Douglass quote.
Let's do it.
Because why not?
Sorry, I can't. He keeps sneezing.
Such a loud sneeze.
It's very loud.
And this is from that same chapter on essay and everything. I do not pretend that Black people are saints and angels. I do not deny that they are capable of committing the crime imputed to them, but utterly deny that they are any more addicted to the commission of that crime than is true of any other variety of the human family. I am not a defender of any man guilty of this atrocious crime, but a defender of the colored people as a class.
So good. I highly recommend everyone read his autobiography.
I'm going to put it on Goodreads right now.
Me too.
Yes.
And then, unless anyone had anything else they want to talk about, Cara, you can go ahead and announce our next show.
Yes. So it is going to be The Pale Lady by Alexandre Dumas. And it is like a really short one. It's like a novella, and it's a vampire story, which I just think sounds like a ton of fun. I have so far had one big hit and one big miss with Alexandre Dumas, so we will see. Who knows what's going to happen, but
it's the tiebreaker.
Yeah. There's going to be some fun drama, it sounds like, because Julia will be so excited. I believe it involves two brothers who are in love with the same woman, which is like Julia's favorite thing in the world.
That's my bread and butter.
Yeah, and other than that, I don't know a lot about it, so I think it'll be a fun one. Yeah, one very, very big miss.
But I'm the same. Three Musketeers, no. Count of Monte Cristo, absolutely yes.
Yes.
So
I don't know what was happening when he wrote The Three Musketeers. I don't know which one came first.
Yeah.
Really though.
Yeah. And I'm very intrigued because, like, right, we know so little about it, but we know there are vampires involved. And so my brain is going, is she the vampire? Is one of the brothers a vampire? Are both the brothers a vampire? Like, I don't know. I would guess it's her because she's the pale lady, but maybe she's pale because they're drinking so much of her blood. Like, I just couldn't tell you.
Who can say? Find out next time who the vampire is.
So that'll be on Cara's channel around the end of March. I don't know if we wanted to figure out now when we wanted to have it, or we
can definitely plan that after we close out, or
then we can share a set.
Yeah.
Yes, but it should be, and it's a short one, so it shouldn't be. Like, I don't think we're gonna have to push it back, probably, because pretty short story. So yeah, join us for some possibly French, possible vampires.
Mm.
I don't know.
Thank you, Cara and Julia, for talking about Angela Davis with me. I'm happy we liked the book. I'm really gunning for that classy award.
I know, now the pressure is on. Like,
and thank you everyone for watching. And have a good night.
Yeah, Nayla, you stuck through to the end. Kudos.
No.
The dedication.
Bye.
Bye.